Let us proceed with clause 30 regarding the certificates and payment. So far we have discussed about the payment applications and issuance of the architect certificate. For the work done by the contractor will need to submit payment applications for the architect and quantity surveyor to ascertain the amount, and then the architect issued an interim certificate to the employer so that the employer can pay the relevant amount to the contractor. In the previous videos, we also discussed about the amount in the interim certificate. This shall include the work properly executed plus the value of the materials and goods minus the amount retained by the employer and also minus the amount previously certified to be paid to the contractor. Now we will proceed with our discussions regarding the set-off by the employer. The meaning of set-off here is that the employer retains some amount of the payment which is supposed to be entitled to the contractor due to certain valid reasons. This is normally due to certain costs or expenses that is supposed to be bound to the contractor, which is not being paid by the contractor, and therefore the employer may set off that relevant amount from the payment to the contractor in order to finance the matter. This slide summarizes the circumstances where the employer is entitled to set off the payments to the contractor that is supposed to be charged to the contractor. It is said that the employer shall be entitled to set off all costs incurred and loss and expenses under a list of the situations here. The relevant cases are listed here under various clauses in the PAM contract. We shall browse it through one by one. First is the failure of the contractor to comply with the architect instructions. You know that the architect instructions is issued instructing the contractor to carry out certain work. When it is put into the architect instruction, that means it is formal and it will need to be done by the contractor. Now, in the case that the contractor refuses to carry out the work, the employer can hire somebody else to carry out the work, and the relevant cost shall be charged to the contractor. Under these circumstances, the employer may set off the amount of the costs related to the work as specified in the architect instructions, which is refused to be carried out by the contractor. The second scenario, it will be due to the liability of the contractor with fees, levy and charges. This is imposed by the law, which will need to be complied by the contractor, and the liability is on the employer. It is the obligations of the contractor to be aware of that and pay the relevant fees, levy and charges, complying to the laws and regulations. If this is not done by the contractor, when penalty imposed to the employer shall be entitled to set off the cost. Next is about rectify errors of the setting out. This is related to the setting out of the site. When the contractor possesses the site, normally there is an initial setting out. The contractor will have to check for the error. If there is no error, the contractor may proceed with the work. However, if there is any error, the cost of rectifying the setting out shall be bound to the contractor. It is either the contractor rectify the entire things by himself, or if the contractor refuses to do so, the employer may hire somebody else to rectify the setting out, and the relevant cost shall be bound to the contractor. This is when the employer can set off the costs related to the rectifications of the setting out. Next is when the work is not in accordance with the contract. Theoretically, the contractor will need to rectify it, and the rectification works and the cost shall be bound by the contractor. However, in the case that the employer instructs the contractor to leave the work without being rectified, due to whatever reason, probably the employer has lost confidence regarding the performance of the contractor. Now the employer do not require the contractor to rectify that. The relevant cost shall be set off from the contractor's payment. That particular cost may be the compensations to the employer regarding the defective work, or may be used to finance somebody else to do the rectification works. Next, the employer shall be entitled to set off the cost when the contractor refuses to rectify the works, not meeting the requirements as per the contract. That means the contractors deliver defective work, or the work given by the contractors do not fulfill the contract. Theoretically, the contractor will have to rectify it at his own cost. However, in the case that the contractor refuses to rectify the work, the employer may set off the cost from the contractor. Next is about the false warranty by the contractor. It is the obligations of the contractor to deliver the work and to provide warranty to the employer. In the case that the contractors falsify the warranty, which the contractor shouldn't do, and this result in the loss suffered by the employer may set off the amount of payment from the contractor. The other situations is when the employer pay other person to rectify the minor defects during the practical completions, when the contractor refuses to undertake. This one happens after the practical completions of the work. Theoretically, all the important works has already been completed, leaving some minor defects over the works, which will not affect the functionality of the building structures to be delivered by the contractor to the employer, and there are still pending minor defects to be rectified by the contractor. Now, if the contractor refuses to undertake, the employer may pay other person to rectify that, and the cost shall be set off from the contractor. Or if the contractor decided to leave the minor defects during the practical completions, under the consensus of the employer, the relevant cost shall also be set off from the payments to the contractor. Same goes to the defects that the contractor fails to attend during the defect liability period. The defect liability period is the period of typically 12 months, which indicates that any defect found related to the work done by the contractor will have to rectify it at his own cost. Now the contractors fail or decided not to do the rectifications, then the relevant cost shall be set off by the employer. This also applies to the critical defects which needs urgent rectifications by the contractor and the contractor refuses to do so. The other one is when the contractor fails to place insurance to injury to person, loss and damage of property. You know that every construction project there shall be insurance to cover the injury of the person, loss and damage of the properties. Now if the contractor chooses not to have this insurance, the employer may insure the project on the contractor's behalf and the relevant cost shall be set off from the payment to the contractor. Same goes to the contractor all risk insurance. The cost shall be bound to the contractor, and if the contractor chooses not to have that, the employer is entitled to claim, or more specifically to set off the cost from the contractor. What you see from the list of the situations where the employer is entitled to set off, this is related to the contractors not performing his obligations or fail to meet the required standard, which resulting in the expenses or losses to the employer, and the relevant cost should theoretically bound by the contractor, and most of the case that the contractor can rectify by himself to ensure smooth delivery and rectifications of those work which is not satisfying, so that the rights of the employer is assured. Now when come to the irresponsible contractor who refuse to do the rectifications or refuse to undertake the responsibility of the cost, the employer is entitled to set off the cost to the amount equivalent to the amount of losses and expenses suffered by the employer from the payments to the contractor. Instead of asking the contractor to rectify or asking the contractor to pay, the employer deduct the payments to the contractor. So by hook or by crook, the employer can salvage the cost, which is supposedly bounded by the contractor and now suffered by the employer. This is an important part to ensure the right of the employer, especially when deal with the hardcore contractor, or probably due to whichever reason that the contractor fails to attend the relevant work, or with the consensus of the employer, the relevant work need not to be attended. In return, there will be a certain amount incurred to the contractor. Now, in order to ensure the set-off, the architect and quantity surveyor shall involve. No set-off may be made unless the architect or quantity surveyor has submitted to the contractors the details of their assessments of set-off. That means the amount to be set off shall be made known to the contractor. The entire thing here will need to make transparent to the contractor so that the rights of the contractor is not being deteriorated by this clause of the set-off by the employer. The reasons of the set-off and the amount of the set-off shall be clearly made known to the contractor. This is so that the employer cannot take advantage over the contractor without any valid reasons. With that, the employer or the architect on the employer behalf will need to give the contractor a written notice delivered by hand or by registered post This is to ensure that the contractor is well aware of the setting off is taking place. Specify the intentions to set off regarding the amount and also the ground of set off. This is referring to the reason of the set off. This need to be made known to the contractor and will need to reach the contractor within 28 days before set off of the cost by the employer. The relevant set off by the employer can be in the forms of the debt or from any money due to the contractor or from the performance bond. Whichever of these that enable the employer to salvage the cost suffered shall be applicable. Now that contractor is made known of the intentions to set off, the amount as well as the reason of the set off, in the case that the contractor dispute the amount of the set off, now within 21 days of the receipt of the written notice of set off, the contractor will need to send the employer a written notice, delivered by hand or by registered post, a statement stating the reason as well as the particular of disagreement. That means the contractors have the right to disagree with the amount to be set off, but this will have to be done formally in the written notice within a period of time of 21 days after receiving the notice from the employer. The contractor will need to justify the dispute, and then we will need to see the response from the employer. If the employer is okay with the dispute, then the contractors and the employer can agree on an amount to be set off by the employer. Now, if both sides cannot agree, that means the contractor propose an dispute and this is not agreed by the employer. Then, within 21 days, either party may refer to adjudications under clause 34.1. It is stated that the employer is unable to set off unless the amount has been agreed by the contractor or the adjudicator has issued his decisions. In another word, to protect the right of the contractor, even though there are some responsibility of the contractors not being delivered, it is also important to prevent the employer to take advantage over the contractor in terms of the set off. Now, the amount to be set off will need to be specified to the contractor, and this will have to come to an agreement with the contractor. The set off shall only take place when the amount is agreed by the contractor, or in the case that the amount is not agreed by the contractor, but the adjudicator has issued his decisions regarding the amount of set off. Simply put, the employer cannot simply set off any amount as he will, and the employer cannot simply set off without the awareness of the contractor.